Have you ever stood at the top of the precarious rafters in Blighttown, peering into the toxic mist below, only to realize that something feels fundamentally off? Or perhaps it's the moment you take the elevator from the warm ruins of the Firelink Shrine, only to end at the void of New Londo. Everyone talks about the clever interconnectivity of the map, but have they ever stopped to question the logic behind these places? Why is the second Bell of Awakening where it is? Why does it sit behind Quelaag's domain, buried deep beneath Blighttown? Why is the entrance beyond the Iron Golem, the only path leading to the City of the Gods, sealed off? The less we play and the more we scrutinize, we realize that the places in Dark Souls are weird. They feel like a collection of geographical anomalies and fever dreams stitched together by impossible architecture and lore. You see it in the way the world is stacked. A prehistoric lake supporting the weight of endless arc trees hazing through the horizon, or a city of lava sitting directly beneath a toxic swamp. They are not just added for the mere diversity of biomes in the game, but they are spatial contradictions. In my research behind these places, I realized how cleverly the world of Lordaeron was built. Yet there are these weird anomalies tied behind each place that makes them truly bizarre. And to understand what makes these locations truly bizarre, we have to look at the geography of these locations, the lore and the theory behind the weird anomalies, and piece together the logic behind these places. Beneath the filth of the depths and the pestilence of the gaping dragon, beneath the sprawling battlements and crumbling ruins of the Berg, lies the swamps of Blighttown. Perhaps it is of no surprise that this place is on the list, not because of the toxic blow darts or the infamous frame drops, but rather due to its sheer architectural absurdity. As you push through the doors leading from the Gaping Dragon's arena, there is a fleeting hope for reprieve, a silent prayer that the next path might be less bleak and less hollowed out than the depths. But the hope is immediately extinguished as you are rewarded with a sight of even more pestilence. The rafters of Blighttown. Historically, this was a mining city, a place of industry, but the scaffoldings that remain are rather unsettling. A chaotic lattice of wooden planks and rusted beams held together by nothing but decay. When I first entered the Blight, the sight of these rafters made my stomach churn. There was something suffocating, grimy, and filthy when I saw those scaffoldings. The planks are old, rusted, and dull. It is as if the grime of the swamp has climbed the walls, infecting the very texture of the wood until it looks saturated with filth. But there is also something eerily wrong with the arrangement. In our reality, we expect symmetry and structural intent from a bridge. Here, the geometry is jagged and nonsensical. These structures don't feel like bridges. We are told that the denizens of Blighttown built those scaffolds to seek safety and facilitate their descent. But I ask you, does this sound safe? How many times have you felt secure navigating these rafters only to find yourself falling face first into the swamp below? But the architecture of the bridges is merely the surface of the distortion. Scattered throughout the scaffolding are these jagged, conical piles of wooden rods, lashed together into crude, towering bundles. Their arrangement and placement are random. There are no lore entries or item descriptions stating their usage or logic behind their placement. They are omnipresent, yet entirely inert. One must ask, what is their purpose? Why are they strewn across the scaffolding like the remains of a ritual we weren't invited to? Looking through some portions of the descent, It might seem like they are used as oddly designed and placed fences to ward off the narrow falls, but their placements are so erratic that they cannot be drawn to a conclusion. Then there are the wheels, massive weathered wooden gears that appear intermittently throughout the ascent. Looking at them, you wonder what function they could possibly serve in a place this far gone. Were they part of the original mining elevators from Lordran's industrial past? Or perhaps something more sinister? Primitive winches used to lower the infected into the depths of the swamp. Whatever their original intent is, they now stand as a silent rotating mechanism with nothing left to turn. Speaking of the rotating mechanisms, there is one particular wheel in these rafters that demands scrutiny. Its sheer size suggests it is a central hub of transportation, a crude elevator intended to ferry goods and denizens between the vertical layers of the Blight. In most fantasy tropes, a mechanism of this scale would be powered by the arcane, or it would be working due to a hidden mechanism. But the reality here is much stranger. If you glare at the wheel from a distance, it appears to move with an eerie, perpetual motion. But upon closer inspection, the magic is revealed to be much more bizarre. The entire elevator system is driven by a single dog, endlessly running with a smaller cage to power the rotation. It is a jarring, almost comedic anomaly. Why would a civilization capable of forging the great soul-infused architecture of Anor Londo resort to a canine-powered water wheel in their most critical mining shaft? But mechanical absurdity is only eclipsed by the biological nightmare that clings to these walls. Located past the bonfire, guarding a narrow tunnel that houses the power within, pyromancy is a creature that seems to exist outside the game's own rules. The parasitic wall hugger. It is a massive, dark red insectoid mass, fused to the cavern wall by 6 lethal claws. Its body is a bulbous sac covered in thin, tentacle-like hairs that twitch as they feel the heavy, stagnant air of the swamp. But the true weirdness lies in its total lack of reaction. Unlike almost every other foe in Lordran, the wall hugger provides no visual or audio feedback when attacked. You strike it with a blade or a spell, and it remains motionless, absorbing the damage in a silence that feels almost like a glitch. Even the UI seems to struggle with its existence. The health bar is detached from the entity, positioned so high above the creature's body that from most camera angles, it remains entirely invisible. There is a jarring physical defiance in how it positions itself. It protrudes, jutting horizontally from the tunnel entrance and clinging with claws that look more like obsidian spikes than organic limbs. Also, the design hints at a lineage far more complex than a simple swamp mutation. While the common denizens of Blighttown are clearly victims of the filth and the pus, this entity feels like a chaos creation, a byproduct of the witch of Izalith's failed flame. But the deepest anomaly is hidden in the game's internal code. In the Japanese files, this creature is referred to as Prince Izalith. I think this suggests that the concept or design of this creature might have been tied to being a significant enemy or NPC that was meant to be a part of Izalith, but was rather discarded later on due to reasons and left to be as the wall hugger in Blighttown. Moving past the grime of the swamp, the environment undergoes a jarring, sterile transformation. You are met with a colossal dome of white silk smothering much of the swamp. Protruding from this silk mass are countless tree trunks, bleached and stripped of all leaves or branches, proving that no life can exist in this swamp. As soon as you enter the tunnels of this silk mass, the weirdness shifts from mechanical to what would be considered as repulsive. Anyone with arachnophobia will have a hard time digesting. The center lining of the tunnels are filled with both humanoid cocoons that are both eerie and disturbing. Also, crawling on the floor are what can be called as the egg-burdened. These are the followers of the Fair Lady, individuals who have volunteered to be living incubators for a parasitic plague. But really, amongst the silk and the eggs, what I find to be bizarre is why the second Bell of Awakening lies beyond Quelaag's domain. Or rather, what I think is the other way around. I think Quelaag was the one who meticulously built her domain around the second bell. In the cut dialogue of Quelaag's, she mentions, "Ah, a precious new sacrifice. Welcome, bringer of meat. The children of chaos are hungry. Give yourself to Quelaag's flame." This is the dialogue of a hunter who has set a trap. We know that from Angie's dialogue that the Fair Lady is dying. In an act of empathy, she devoured the blight pus, the essence of the swamp's filth, to spare the denizens of Blighttown. This left her physically shattered, blind, and perpetually starving for humanity to ease her pain. To save her sister, Quelaag had become a provider, and she found the ultimate lure, the prophecy of bells. The reason Quelaag might have built her domain specifically around the second bell is predatory instinct. She knew that the chosen undead would inevitably be drawn here, following the myth of the bells like moths to a flame. She uses her beautiful body as a honey trap, luring in knights and adventurers into the heart of her web. Every chosen undead who sought to ring that bell was merely another bringer of meat, a fresh source of humanity to be harvested for her sister's survival. The weirdness of the location is, in reality, a desperate survival tactic. After ringing the second bell, you might as well want to take a trip back to the Firelink Shrine. There is some remarkable weirdness that follows here, a geographic break that simply does not line up. The elevator to New Londo from the Firelink Shrine makes no sense. Consider the transit. You begin at Firelink Shrine, a place defined by warmth, amber flow of the setting sun, and the open sky. You step onto a lift, and in less than 30 seconds of descent, you emerge into a subterranean cavern devoid of life. This is rather weird as the entire skybox changes. How can someone take a lift from literal daylight and then descend into twilight? It is just a sudden, jarring jump from the world of the living to the world of the drowned. Everyone talks about the clever interconnectivity of the map, how the lift provides a shortcut back to the surface. But have they ever truly wondered at this strange anomaly? New Londo is a city that was flooded to seal away the Four Kings and the Dark Wraiths. Yet, despite being beneath the shrine, it feels like it exists in its own pocket dimension. The air is different, the light is dim. It is as if the elevator is not moving through dirt and stone, but through a thin veil between two incompatible versions of Lordran. Upon closer inspection of the ruins of New Londo, we can spot a tiny hole just in the skybox, suggesting that the entire city sits inside a massive hollowed-out geological puncture. But geometrically, when you place New Londo beneath the surface, the math stops aligning. It is a city of massive stones, vertically organized and walled, yet it is situated with a cave that offers its own natural defense. Why build a towering fortification underground? The answer is rather disheartening. New Londo was never built to keep an enemy out. It was built to keep a population in. Besides the geographical oddity, the city was a home to a thriving culture, a place of unique sorceries and healing arts. Yet there is not a single scrap of that culture left in the architecture. While Anor Londo is adorned with statues of gods and ornate figures, New Londo is eerily blank. There is no distinctive designs or decorative symbols. The only statues presented are identical to the ones found in the painted world of Ariamis, a location explicitly used by the gods as a trash bin for the things that they feared. This is not just a coincidence, but rather a design choice by the nameless blacksmith deity to suppress the culture of the humans living there. I think New Londo was a monitored colony long before the Abyss ever touched it. The gods did not just give 4 kings a shard of Gwyn's soul as a reward. They gave it to them as a leash. The massive floodgates operated by the same complex gear systems found in the Duke's archives and Anor Londo were meant to keep the Valley of the Drakes dry. They were built to ensure that when the gods decided the human problem, the dark, and the abyss has grown too large and leaking out, they could pull a single lever and drown an entire culture in a Sunday afternoon. Also, the most unsettling realization is that the floodgates were not an afterthought. While building the city of New Londo, which was probably built after Anor Londo was built, and a lot of the structures we see in New Londo was helped by the gods and their race to build it, the floodgates were integrated to be a part of the city since its completion. This meant that while the humans of New Londo were building their prosperous culture and unique healing sorceries, the gods were already installing the off switch. But before we understand the weirdness of the floodgates, we have to understand what really caused the gods to even flood the city. According to the law of Lordran, at some point the first flame began to fade out, leading to the emergence of the curse of undeath, but the city continued to exist and function as an undead city, implying a good governance by the 4 kings who managed to adapt to the change. After Gwyn sacrificed himself to link the fading first flame, the primordial serpent, Kath, began searching for a human strong enough to become the Dark Lord, capable of leading humans and ushering in an Age of Dark. At some point, Kath arrived in New Londo and managed to seduce the 4 kings to follow his ideals, teaching them the art of life drain so that they could preserve their humanity even while undead, and so cast off the shackles placed on them by the gods. But his dark influence did not stop with the kings. In fact, their entire army followed them. The Knights of New Londo became Dark Wraiths, servants of the dark who learned the art of life drain and used it to absorb humanity. Having failed to dispose of the dark threat, an agonizing and terrible decision was made, flooding the entire land of New Londo, despite the realization that countless lives and the entire culture of the country would be lost. A nation of humans was now freed from the shackles of the dark sign, and not only began to understand the powers of their dark soul, but had an entire army at their disposal that shared this power. This represented an unparalleled threat to the gods of Anor Londo, who branded the Dark Wraiths as diabolical enemies of man and of every living thing. Knight Artorius, one of the 4 kings of Gwyn, was sent to New Londo to fight the Dark Wraiths and to defeat the 4 kings, but he failed to do so. Due to this, the gods decided to seal the city by flooding it. The main purpose of the flood was to seal the 4 kings and the Dark Wraiths specifically. But the goal of flooding Dark Wraiths was a spectacular failure. When we arrive in New Londo, we don't see the Dark Wraiths drowned and gone. The thousands of innocent civilians whose spirits now drift as ghosts. The creatures who were left to drown were the ones who survived, and this is rather strange. The lore description consistently used words like contain, banish, and seal. The gods knew water would not kill the dark. They knew it would not sink them, yet the gods still flooded the city. In the universe of Dark Souls, humanity has a literal physical weight. It is viscous, heavy, and rather liquid. As seen in Ringed City, the Dark Souls is often considered to be a vicious substance, and Guile, at the end of the trilogy, was asked to fetch the Dark Soul, which by the time he reaches the Pygmy Lords has been turned into blood. Due to this, Guile is turned into a frenzy, and he has to eat the remains of the Pygmy Lords to obtain their blood of the Dark Souls. If humanity is a liquid that sinks, then flooding the city was not an attempt to drown the Dark Wraiths, but it was an attempt to pin them down using the crushing pressure of the flood. The water kept the Dark from rising back to the surface. This explains why the Dark Wraiths are perfectly intact when you lower the water levels. They weren't supposed to die. They were supposed to stay exactly where they were, at the bottom. The weirdness of the innocent ghosts roaming the upper ruins is just collateral damage. The gods didn't care about the people. They cared about the weight. They needed enough mass, enough volume, to create a stagnant pool where the abyss and humanity could be kept in check. And this brings us to the final anomaly in New Londo, and that is, once you drain the water and descend the spiral staircase, you reach the point where the map simply ends. You jump into a hole and land on nothing. It is a pitch-black void with no floors, no walls, and no ceilings. It is the only place in the game that is not a location in the traditional sense, but a literal absence of space. But past the floods of New Londo, we encounter a rather strange location that is often ignored: the Valley of the Drakes. Not much is known about this area besides its utility as a shortcut, a way to reach Firelink Shrine when ascending from Blighttown, or to sneak into Darkroot's Basin early. Yet it stands as a remarkably mysterious location. Geographically, it is a narrow ridge of land acting as a pass between three major zones, but its name and its inhabitants raise questions that the lore never explicitly answers. Why is the narrow, jagged scar known as the Valley of the Drakes? Why are these creatures scattered here and nowhere? Beyond the Hellkite Drake on the Undead Parish Bridge, these are the only drakes we see in Lordran. These specimens are smaller, blue, and, most bizarrely, spew lightning instead of fire. Out of every dragon, wyvern, or drake in the series, these are the outliers. In the Age of Ancients, dragons were immortal, unchanging, and famously weak to lightning. When Gwyn and his knights used the power of sunlight to peel away their stone scales, the dragons who were weak to lightning were systematically hunted to extinction. I believe through time, the descendants of the Archdragons grew resistant to lightning, the very element that killed their kin. Since the Age of Fire introduced a disparity, change, and time into the world, it became possible for biological shifts to occur. These drakes are the result of that shift. Unlike the ancient dragons, which were more like primordial forces of nature, I think these drakes were shifted to be the more natural evolution of the Archdragons. Another theory which I hold strongly towards is that the gargoyles of Anor Londo spew lightning. These were creatures that were shaped by the gods to use lightning and then serve the gods. Similarly, these lesser drakes, which are less powerful and more tameable, were mutated by the gods to spew lightning and use them for their own advantage. These drakes might have served the gods and then escaped to the valley for safety, But then another question arises. Why settle there? Above all the places, this seems to be the most random and strange location to reside in for a drake. Why not the Undead Parish or even Anor Londo itself? Because Valley of the Drakes serves as a strategical advantage. It is a narrow, wind-swept pass situated between the Divine City above and the Dark Ruins below. It might be the only peaceful place where no shackles of gods or other creatures can ruin their peace. Also, besides the undead dragon, the drakes are the only creatures here, so that even fortifies the theory. Moving from the jagged valleys, we ascend towards the pinnacle of Lodrin's hierarchy. But even here, in the City of the Gods, the architecture reveals a jarring, weird secret. When we reach the summit of Sen's fortress, we expect a grand entry into the kingdom of the gods. After all, this fortress was the ultimate training ground, and the Iron Golem was the final trial for those seeking to prove their worth. In the past, victors of ceremonial battles in Ulasil were granted access to these hollowed halls. But today, that entire merit system has been scrapped. Behind the Iron Golem lies a massive entrance that is completely bricked up. This is the first weird detail that breaks the immersion. It wasn't collapsed by time or destroyed in a siege. It was sealed carefully and deliberately. Why would a king seal off the only known entrance to his capital in such a permanent way? It feels like another manifestation of Gwyn's growing paranoia, a choice to isolate Anor Londo from the common folk below. But when you scrutinize the geometry, the anomaly becomes even stranger. The height of this bricked-up gate doesn't align with the Anor Londo we actually explore. The entrance is significantly lower than the ramparts, the lifts, and the main cathedral road. If you were to walk through the gate, you wouldn't emerge at the feet of the giant sentinels. You would be deep beneath the city's foundations. I think this entrance didn't lead to the gods at all. Looking at the height markers, it's likely this tunnel led to the lower districts, the residential outskirts and public sectors of Anor Londo that we see as a distant, unreachable backdrop. What we explore in-game is a mere fragment, a high-altitude sanctuary for the elite. By breaking up this gate, Gwyn was amputating the public half of his city. It served the connection between the gods and the people, isolating the silver spires from the residential sprawl below. But as we speculate the location of Sen's fortress, we are hit with a weird anomaly. The placement of Sen's fortress is often weird. It sits like a jagged bridge between the dirty world of humans and the golden city of the gods. The fortress is, of course, a fortress, but we must ask the question, is a fortress meant to keep guard or protect the vicinity? But what exactly is this structure guarding? Or rather, is it a giant vertical execution chamber built to weed out the weak? We know it's called Sen's fortress, but Sen's identity has been completely erased from history. Whether it is a forgotten god or an ancient word for old, the name remains a mystery, all while the death trap itself remains perfectly functional. And look at the logic of the traps, the boulder mechanism specifically. Have you ever wondered where the boulders go? They roll into bottomless pits or pile up in rooms, yet the supply never runs out. It is as if the fortress is literally creating its own ammunition to smudge a helpless undead. Then there are the inhabitants. Why are there man-serpents here, of all places? These are half-human and half-serpentine creatures created by Seath the Scalers to act as jailers in the Duke's archives. These serpent creatures are equipped with magic and weapons, They act as hurdles to the souls who want to reach the sun. There is the weirdest question, which I think needs to be addressed. If the gods desperately needed a chosen undead to sacrifice themselves and link the flame, why even build an entire fortress that measured as a gauntlet? If the goal for the chosen undead was to reach the city of the gods, why even build a road blockade and slow down the path? The law according to Sen's fortress. After Lord Gwyn's sacrifice, his sons followed his design, shepherding humans to repeat the same cycle. Sen's fortress was built specifically as a testing ground, the second main trial for any undead who had already overcome the Bells of Awakening. On the surface, it is a rite of passage. You survive the swinging blades, the ballistae, and the iron golem to prove you are worthy of the Lord Vessel. But there is a glaring weird contradiction here that needs to be addressed. If the gods desperately need a chosen undead to sacrifice themselves, why build an entire fortress designed as a slaughterhouse? If the goal is to get the savior to Anor Londo as quickly as possible, why build a roadblock? Something that is meant to slow them down, or something that is most likely to even kill them. I think this exposes the true hypocritical nature of the gods. While the prophecy calls for a hero, the architecture of Sen's fortress suggests that the gods were equally terrified of what that hero might become. They didn't just want a chosen undead, they wanted a refined product. Sen's fortress acts as a filter to remove all the unwanted undead and to only pave way to the strongest. By stuffing the tower with impossible traps, Seath's man-serpent jailers and enslaved giants, the gods ensured that only a being of immense will and power could hail past this fortress and make their way to the land of the gods. But there is a darker layer. By making the path nearly impossible, the gods were effectively culling the herd. According to the law, there is only one chosen undead who is determined and destined to succeed no matter what. After he succeeds in obtaining all the Lord's souls, he gets a choice to either link the first flame or to make way to an age of darkness. Gwyn knew this, so all of the challenges prior to Anor Londo might be a gauntlet used to filter out everything except the chosen undead. Of course, there are exceptions like Black Iron Tarkus and Solaire, who managed to clear all the obstacles and to reach the land of the gods, but their stories also comes to a bitter halt. Black Iron Tarkus falls from the rafters or is overwhelmed by the painting guardians. Solaire is blinded by the sunlight maggot and driven mad, unless the chosen undead ventures in to save him. Over the centuries, this test has claimed almost everyone. Legendary heroes like Night King Rendell, Prince Ricard, and even Master Sorcerer Big Hat Logan. When we enter Sen's fortress, we see a lot of corpses of everyone who ventured in to clear the trials but was left behind by the impossible gauntlet of the fortress. But why filter out everyone besides the chosen undead? Gwyn knew that there is a chance that the chosen undead might be blinded by Cath or the Dark, or rather, discover the truth behind the Age of Fire and its unnecessary extension and the propaganda of Gwyn. Due to this, he might lead humanity to ascension and lead in the Age of Dark. And if a Dark Lord were ever to rise and attempt to lead an army against Anor Londo, that army would have already been decimated by the swinging blade of the Iron Golem. The fortress ensures that while one hero might slip through to serve as fuel for the fire, an entire movement of humans never could. It is a filter designed to produce a solitary martyr while smothering a potential revolution. After surviving the filth of the Blight and the meat grinder of Sen's fortress, we finally arrive. Anor Londo, the city of the gods. It is arguably the most beautiful location in the game, but it is also the most weird in its sheer artificial perfection. Here, the anomalies shift from the physical to the metaphysical. We are no longer dealing with traps of iron and wood, but with a city that is essentially a lie held together by an illusion. Immediately after we ascend from Sen's fortress towards the blinding lights of Anor Londo, we notice the scale of the ascent itself. The city of the gods is mounted on top of a plateau or a hill. This just shows that Gwyn thought of humanity and the bearers of the Dark Souls as lesser creatures. All of the filth that lies past this plateau is separated by a huge immense wall and the scale of impossible height that separates the filth and the pristine. Also, something strange is that the skyboxes of Sen's fortress and the Undead Burg, which are the closest regions to Anor Londo, have a different skybox of blue sky and overall the vibe of an afternoon. But immediately after you ascend, the skybox changes to perpetual golden lights. Something feels off. Somehow, the skyboxes don't match. It's as if in a world where the first flame is fading and the dark is encroaching everywhere else, Anor Londo remains a frozen snapshot of a golden age that has already ended. It is the only place in Lordran where the sky itself is a piece of Gwyn's propaganda. But the weirdness lies in the scale of the architecture. Everything is for giants, not you. You feel like a tiny flea crawling across the dinner table of the gods. The stairs are too wide, the doors are too heavy, and the hallways are cavernous. Yet the only giants that we even see are a giant blacksmith and a giant sentinel guarding the hallways. It is a divine city with no divinity left to inhabit it. Throughout your journey, you have faced demons and horrifying abominations in crumbling ruins, but Anor Londo feels pristine, marvelous, and freshly made. The pillars stand clean, the grand halls are sturdy without a single dent. Even the enemies here are civilized. The Silver Knights in their polished plate, and the giants in golden cuirasses, something we don't see in the filth below. But for all its beauty, Anor Londo is strikingly empty. Where is everyone? You see Silver Knights standing guard, frozen like statues, protecting rooms that have been empty for centuries. Surprisingly, if you listen to the ambience of the halls, you can hear something else. Players have long reported a skin-crawling phenomenon while exploring these spires. The sound of someone else running nearby, or the heavy thud of doors opening and closing just out of sight. If we revisit the ambient sound files, we can observe that these sounds, the footsteps, the creaking hinges, they're actually baked directly into the ambient music of the zone. Some suggest this is another symptom of the distorted timeline that plagues Lordran. Much like the maddening whispering you can hear in the Duke's archives, these sounds are echoes of the people who still lived in the city before the gods abandoned it. It reinforces the idea that Anor Londo is less of a physical place and more of a metaphysical record player, endlessly looping the sound of a civilization that no longer exists. I think this makes the empty feeling of the city even weirder. It suggests that the city isn't just physically empty, but the time itself has become stagnant here. You are walking through a museum where the ghosts of the visitors are still moving through the galleries, invisible and unreachable. But beyond all of this stagnation, why does Anor Londo differ from the rest of the game, even though the Age of Dark is approaching? In a world where time is convoluted, Anor Londo feels like it's been vacuum sealed. There is no moss on these stones. There is no grime in these corners. It is as if the city is resisting the natural law of decay that has already claimed the rest of the world. While the humans in New Londo were literally drowned to contain the future, and the denizens of Blighttown were left to mutate in the waste, the gods used their remaining power to freeze their home in a state of perpetual noon. The city stands pristine because to let it crumble would be to admit that the gods have lost. But there is a deeper meaning to this stagnation and illusion. I think that this illusion might be created to ensure the chosen undead stays motivated. Think about it. If you arrive at the peak of the world and found only a dark, moonlit graveyard of marble, would you really feel like the Age of Fire was worth saving? If the player saw the truth, that the fire is already out, and the gods have already fled, the realization would be immediate. There is no salvaging this world. The only logical path left would be to usher in the Age of Dark. To prevent this, Gwendolyn was left behind to maintain the illusion. Without this gilded lie, the prophecy loses its power. The weirdness of the golden sky is actually a desperate attempt to hide the fact that the sun is already set on the Age of Fire. Once the Lord Vessel is placed, we gain access to the deeper strata of Lordran. The demon ruins and lost Izalith are often criticized for their rushed development. But if we look past the enemy placement, the scale and unique assets reveal a much more complex history. The first major anomaly of the region is the colossal metallic dome visible to the left of the initial vista. This is not a natural cavern ceiling formation. It is a fully modeled high-precision shell emblazoned with the flower symbols of the nameless blacksmith deity. We can verify the sheer scale of this engineering by clipping out of bounds from the Tomb of the Giants, which reveals the structure as an enormous artificial vessel designed to encase the entire city of Izalith. The presence of such a structure raises immediate questions about its intended purpose. It functions less like a roof and more like the casing to seal off the flames created by the witches. However, the current state of the dome tells a story of catastrophic failure. A jagged monumental crack splits the metal, where massive roots have forced their way through. This suggests that the chaos flame erupted with so much intensity that the dome could not withstand it. Looking at the cliffside structures above Quelaag's domain, the anomaly of Izalith's original design becomes even more distinct. They are fully modeled buildings with stairs, corridors, and rooms hidden behind the cave walls. There are two specific variants of these structures, one designed for human-sized inhabitants and another of the exact same style but scaled up to massive proportions, complete with oversized doorways. This architectural disparity proves that before the Chaos Era, Izalith was structured into a dual-scale society. It was a city where the humans and much larger beings, perhaps the ancestors of the demons, lived in a calculated urban harmony. The rooms exist as a silent record of a period where demons weren't monsters to be hunted, but a demographic with their own dedicated housing and civilian infrastructure. The weirdness of the city's layout is further evidenced by its abandoned road systems. Izalith features massive bridges and stone paths, like the one guarded by the Titanite demon, which now terminate in dead ends or are blocked by roots. If we enable the collision data for New Londo, we find an unsettling geographical fact. These lost roads from Izalith point directly into the abyss of the Four Kings. In the game's engine, these two locations occupy a nearly identical vertical space, overlapping at the very bottom of the world. This physical proximity, combined with the fact that the Izalith staff is one of the few items that boosts dark magic, suggests that the flame of the witches and the dark of the four kings were originally part of a singular interconnected research project. Also, in the item description of the same staff in Dark Souls 3, it has been specifically mentioned that the witches of Izalith, long before they became pyromancers, were sorcerers. However, the most significant anomaly in the region is the presence of wood. In a land defined by lava, there is an integrated use of wood throughout the level design, including roots that form the path down to the centipede demon and branches that allow us to cross the lava lake. The first flame, as seen in the kiln, has the power to consume arc trees completely, leaving only ash in its wake. That is how the vast empty ash lake was carved out. The witch's flame, however, was a failure. Despite the endless lava and the heat of the city, it could not burn through the arc trees. It is rather weird that instead of consuming the trees, along with its roots and branches, it contained the flame. The tree's roots endured, breaking through the tome and forming the very paths we walk on. It is like the tree is adapting to disaster. Also, the center of this molten nightmare is the bed of chaos. While often dismissed as a frustrating boss encounter, its design is a critical piece of the geographical anomaly that is Lost Izalith. But look closely at the wooden growths that define the area and the surrounding lake. At first glance, you might assume they are simply branches born of the chaos flame, but the reality is far weirder. If you look up from the ruins, you see these tendrils hanging down like roots, stretching toward the city from the cave ceiling above. Yet inside Izalith proper, they stretch out like branches. These two distinct growth patterns collide in the lava lake, where the downward-reaching roots meet the upward-stretching branches. This suggests that the bed of chaos is not actually a tree in its own right, but a parasite feeding off something far larger. We've seen this theme of parasitism throughout the demon lineage, from Quelaag and his sister to the Egg Bearers, where two forms of life are forced into a singular, often grotesque, symbiotic existence. By following the roots upward and into the shadows behind the city, we discover the source of this growth, an arc tree of impossible proportions. To understand the weirdness here, we have to look at the scale. The great hollow which defines the descent to Ash Lake could comfortably fit within the diameter of this single Izalith tree. It is multiple times wider than the entire city and tall enough that, according to collision data, its canopy might reach as far as the Duke's archives. In Ash Lake, or when viewed from the Tomb of the Giants, the arc trees are relatively uniform. The Izalith tree, however, has grown to an unnatural game-breaking scale. It suggests a reciprocal corruption. The witch took on the tree-like qualities of the arc tree, and in turn, the arc tree became something more demonic, expanding far beyond its natural limits. The location of Lost Izalith is also contradictory. It shows the few cracks in the game's world design, which is almost flawless for a game that is almost 15 years old. We have been taught that Ash Lake is the lowest point in the world of Lordran. It is a primeval space where the world sprouted its roots. Yet if we take a glance into the collision data, it is revealed that the bed of chaos sits lower than the floor of the Ash Lake. I do not think that there is any lore implication behind this. I still think that technically, Ash Lake should be the lowest point in the map of Lordran, but I think the developers, due to some mishappenings and the tight deadline, were not able to match and correct this exact flaw in the map. Also, besides Elden Ring and somewhat Sekiro, all other software games don't have any maps, so I don't really think this flaw was intended for the player base to see. The Kiln of the First Flame is an area that is designed to inspire a specific awe, a surreal ashen wasteland which serves as the very place where Gwyn's power both began and ended. But once you look past the haunting atmosphere, you start to notice geographic anomalies that suggest a deeper meaning. The first anomaly is the scale. The area is surrounded by an absolutely colossal wall that is far larger than any fortification in the Undead Burg or even the ramparts of Anor Londo. Its scale is unmatched anywhere else in the game, suggesting that this was a very sacred zone for Gwyn and the gods. The Kiln of the First Flame is built deep underground. But despite all of this, why is the Kiln surrounded by a wall? Think of the power of the First Flame. It is primeval and raw, unaltered and devastating. It is the source of all disparity, heat and cold, life and death, light and dark. At its peak, the flame was considered a cosmic eruption. While linking the First Flame, Gwyn decimates everything to ash. The armor of Black Knights are charred permanently to black. The vicinity around Gwyn is turned into rubble. The floor is covered in soot and ash. All structures are reduced to ash and rubble, except for the wall that is surrounding the kiln. It looks rather pristine and standalone, in contrast to the rest of the structure. In a real-life scenario, a wall is basically a barricade used to protect and contain something from the outside. But I think in this scenario, the wall around the kiln was made to contain the destruction the First Flame leaves behind. Gwyn knew the Age of Fire would end, and someone had to travel to the kiln to rekindle the First Flame. Whether it be Gwyn himself or another chosen undead that comes after him, due to this, Gwyn might have been motivated to build the wall and to bar off any destruction that is caused by it. Also, the kiln was originally designated to be directly underneath the Firelink Shrine. The statue just behind Frampt was meant to be pushed aside sometime in the game by Andrea, and that would lead us to the path of the Firelink altar, and essentially the kiln. But this was removed later on in the game's production. This means that the kiln was originally designed to be under the Firelink Shrine and the rest of Lordran, which might have caused Gwyn to seal off the kiln by building a wall, so it does not cause any destruction while linking it to the world that is just above. The wall is a literal furnace casing. It is designed to contain the radiation of the First Flame, to trap the heat and light within a controlled space so that the world above could remain stable. However, the weirdest detail of the kiln is right beneath your feet. If you look closely, the central arena does not actually sit on the ash. It is resting on a wooden foundation. Its structure is the exact match for the base that holds the Lord vessel in the Firelink altar. This raises a massive question. What is this place? I believe the kiln was once the base of an arc tree, even larger than the Great Hollow. If so, those huge curved structures were not just decorative. They were braces used to support the trunk of a tree that pierced the heavens. This theory is supported by Gwyn's internal development name, Firewood King. It explains the sheer volume of ash. To leave behind a wasteland of this magnitude, something gargantuan had to burn. A giant tree, the firewood of a god, would provide exactly that kind of fuel. But why is the kiln located inside an arc tree? The First Flame was sprouted or brought about inside an arc tree, as we see in the opening cinematics when the narrator says, "But then there was fire, and with fire came disparity." We even see the cameraman moving inside the arc tree, and finally, we see a fire inside what looks like the kiln. So the kiln we see in-game might be the same place in the opening cutscene inside the Arc Tree. Speaking of Arc Tree, we finally descend into the endless void of Arc Trees, a lake that stretches into a white infinite horizon, a place that feels distinct and different from any other location in the entire game. Every other location in the game is ruined or was a fragment of its past, but Ash Lake feels untouched. It's strange and unsettling. It is the primordial substrate of reality, the world as it was during the Age of Ancients, before disparity introduced heat, cold, life, and death. Descending into Ash Lake feels like a geographical mistake. To even witness this place, you have to break through two illusory walls, the game's way of burying a secret so deep it shouldn't have been found. Unlike the crumbling undead Berg or the rotting Blighttown, Ash Lake is unformable. It doesn't feel like it's decaying. It feels like it's waiting. The first weird break in reality is the audio. Aside from Filing's Shrine, this is the only location with a persistent accompanying soundtrack, an operatic chant that feels like the world's baseline frequency. It feels like the audio track is welcoming you from the world of fire to the world of grey and ancients. But what makes this place truly unsettling is its purposelessness. There are no mandatory bosses, no major plot triggers, and strangely, no item descriptions that even mention the name Ash Lake. It exists entirely outside the narrative of the chosen undead, a purposeless zone that serves no master. Even the enemies here feel like intruders. The giant clams and the hydra are tethered to the world above, yet they roam this indifferent beach as if they simply fallen through the cracks. The weirdness of Ash Lake is best represented by the large skull resting in the sand. Scrutinize the skull for a second. It doesn't resemble a dragon. It doesn't resemble a giant. It has mammalian saber-like canine teeth, features found nowhere else in Lordran's biology. Whatever this was, it was significantly larger than anything we encountered in the game. It suggests arc trees as a gateway. If the Great Hollow is an arc tree that leads to Lordran, then the countless other trees stretching into the white fog likely lead to Karim, Astora, or lands we haven't even dreamed of. Then there is Stone Dragon. It sits at the edge of the world, a silent descendant of the ancients. I think it is one of the last surviving arc dragons ever perching in the only place in Lordran which it can even call home. It has no health bar. You can cut its tail, you can strike its stone scales, and it simply stares into the infinite horizon. The arc trees are the silent witness to the vanity of the gods. They held up the whole world while Gwyn built his kingdom of light, and they will continue to hold up the void long after his name is forgotten. Every climb, every sacrifice, and every chosen undead is just a brief, chaotic flicker occurring in the small gap between the breaches of the roots. In the end, the weirdness of Ash Lake is its indifference. It is the beginning. It is the end. It is the only thing in Lordran that is truly, terrifyingly permanent. But as massive and unsettling as these grand architectures are, from the parasitic domes of Izalith to the canine-powered lifts of the Blight, they are only half of the story. If you zoom in past the horizon and look into the corners where the collision data truly begins to scream, you find something even more disturbing. There are specific isolated pockets of this world that shouldn't exist. Spots where the developers left behind impossible geometry, where the law contradicts the very ground you stand on, and where the weirdness becomes a theme. We've seen the bones of the world, but now it's time to look at the scars. Because if you thought the transition to New Londo was jarring, you haven't seen the spots where Lordran truly starts to unravel. Join me as we unravel the weird spots in Dark Souls you have never noticed.